welcome back to Listography. Jason, Joe, and Cramser. Day 3 of Soundgarden Week, Side 3. Today we're talking about grunge music, specifically the Big Four. Grunge is kind of a contentious term. Some people don't really like it. It's a bit of a vague term. As far as genres go, it's hard to say what grunge really even is. So to me, the way I define it is kind of a blending of like classic rock, punk, and metal. And it seems like every band from Seattle at the time had a different kind of recipe of those three things. So they all sound pretty different. But that's kind of how I think about it. I guess it's a genre, but if you say something sounds like grunge, it's not really a good indicator of what it sounds like.
Yeah, I think of it more not as much as the sound, but sort of like the artistic approach of these bands and the style. And just the attitude really, it was the big counterculture movement of the late 80s and early 90s. And, it's got its own clothing and fashion kind of style to it. And yeah, so, but I mean, there's Nirvana and Alice in Chains and Soundgarden sound completely different. So yeah, it's not like, but I mean, you could probably say that within most genres, but yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the term, but also know exactly what it is. So it's kind of a weird double-edged sword there. But yeah, I love grunge for sure.
I totally agree. It's if you say something sounds like grunge, I immediately think, okay, is it Nirvana, Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, or Pearl Jam? Or is it just that aesthetic where it's like sort of counterculture, sort of anti-capitalist, sort of the Seattle, like it almost means more like that Seattle sort of feeling more than like an actual style. Because yes, Alice in Chains was definitely more metal inspired. Soundgarden was a little, Stooges, Black Sabbath. Nirvana was a lot more underground, alt, Pixies, stuff like that, Melvins, whatever. And Pearl Jam sounded like sort of like Neil Young, like they were classic rock, radio, big guitars. So there's really no grunge sound. But if you say grunge, like those are the bands you think of. There were a couple others, but like those pretty much dominate all the grunge headlines.
And to me, really, after Versus, Pearl Jam doesn't have like any grunge sort of aspect to them at all. Maybe a little bit more on binaural again, but like Yield, Vitalogy, those aren't grunge albums to me, really.
All right, so I guess what we're gonna do, we're gonna take the Big Four. We're each gonna rank them in our order of preference, and then are we gonna pick a fifth?
We shall pick a fifth.
Yeah, and then we're gonna play the what if it was a Big Five instead of a Big Four, which other band would we put in there? So who wants to start with the ranking?
I can kick off the ranking. My number 4 it's a tough one, but it's going to be Nirvana, mostly because they only have 3 albums, and I really do like Nevermind. I think In Utero is great. Bleach, I rarely ever listen to, and love Kurt, love Dave, love Chris. I think they're great, but they just never quite did it for me. So it's probably like that alternative underground sort of undercurrent that kind of annoyed me a little bit, but they're still a very good band. Number 3, I gotta put Soundgarden at number 3. Despite this being Soundgarden week, their output just a little too one note, not quite enough variation in it. They never did, they didn't have a Jar of Flies or a Sap like Alice in Chains where they completely changed up their entire identities. They were sort of just really heavy riffage, got pretty radio friendly with Super Unknown. But then they broke up without really like delving into other stuff. So they're going to be my number 3. My number 2, I guess, is going to be Pearl Jam, but it's so close. Pearl Jam, I think, maybe suffers despite me liking pretty much all of their 11 albums. I don't think they have any real stinkers. It's sort of like that argument you make when you're looking at like a running back in the Hall of Fame where You can have a 20-year period of being like really great, and you were great at the beginning, and then you kind of tailed off a little bit, maybe rode the coattails of the team you were on. Or you can have like that Barry Sanders where it's like every year is great. So I guess Pearl Jam is going to be my sort of like, yeah, they're still good and everything, but I don't know. Alice in Chains' output, I think, puts them at number one. Just that string from Facelift to the self-titled with Jar of Flies and Sap. I just think they were the most interesting. I like the metal sound. Obviously, that's going to play a big role in my rankings. So I'm going to pick them just because they had like that dark beauty that I don't think anyone else ever really did. They didn't have any sort of like twins or other bands that really kind of followed in their footsteps or were like them. So I'm going to go with AIC as my number one, Pearl Jam number two, Soundgarden number three, Nirvana number four. And for a fifth, it's tough. Like I'd want to say Screaming Trees or Mudhoney, but I don't know if they ever like quite got there. And you have the like grandfathers of grunge is Green River, but they only had the one album, despite it being excellent. I guess I would go with Mudhoney. I think is my honorary number five, but I don't think they ever quite achieved the level of success necessary for like a Mount Rushmore. So they're like the Visitors' Deck or something.
So it sounds like you're only considering Seattle bands for your five spot. Do you consider outside? Do you consider Smashing Pumpkins, Dinosaur Jr., STP? Are they grunge or are they not?
I wouldn't consider any of those grunge. Not just because they're not from Seattle, but like their sound was a little too different, I think. It just doesn't. I mean, that's tough though, because we just talked about how sound really is different. I don't know. I just never consider those bands like from the grunge experience.
Yeah, why is like the question. Like, if I mean, Gish wasn't a huge hit, but Siamese Dream was. And if Siamese Dream came out in 91 and they were from Seattle and the album sounded exactly the same, there's no doubt people would say they were grunge. No doubt about it. It's an STP Core definitely is a grunge album, but then Purple isn't. But I mean, you could say the same to me, like I said with Pearl Jam. Once they get to Vitalogy, they're not really a grunge band anymore. So it's tough. I mean, all those bands you mentioned are good.
I think, honestly, of those bands mentioned, I think Dinosaur Jr. has the biggest claim because they really have that sort of like anti-establishment, like flavor to them. Like Smashing Pumpkins, I think leaned a little too hard into like the alternativeness, and SDP leaned a little too hard into like the popular, like big radio stuff right off the bat. I think Dinosaur Jr. has that sort of like anti-establishment cred that you need to be like a grunge band. So I think they would be probably the honorary member.
I don't see Pearl Jam being that anti-establishment though. I mean, they came out the gate with Jeremy and Alive,
but then they flipped and were like, we hate Ticketmaster and we hate MTV. We're not putting out any videos. We don't want to appear on them. They sort of immediately rebelled. So I think that gives them their cred.
fair enough.
All right. For mine, yeah, it is Soundgarden week, but they're my number four. They're really the only ones that don't have a shot at being like an all-time favorite artist of mine. Their albums peak at 4-star ratings. You don't really, Loud Love is one of my all-time favorite songs. And if we were doing singers, Cornell would be number one. But yeah, I've got them at number four. And yeah, just the output not being plentiful or as memorable. And like I said in the other videos, thing for me that really sets them apart is the songwriting's just not as good, not as creative as the other artists. Number three, I'm gonna go. This is tough. I'm gonna go Alice in Chains at 3, but they're definitely in my top 100 favorite artists of all time. I love them. I've got Nirvana at number 2. it would be an easier way to put them at number 2 if they just had one more album. But I think In Utero and Nevermind are masterpieces, and I like Bleach a lot. And I just think, some of the greatest songs ever are Nirvana songs. So I give them that. And I love the unplugged version. But my number 1 is Pearl Jam. I've never hid that on this channel. I'm a massive Pearl Jam fan, pretty much all the way through their catalog. I just think their music has the best listenability factor to it. All of their albums, I just got Pearl Jam ahead. If Nirvana had more albums, they would probably compete with that. So yeah, I got to go Pearl Jam. My number 5 would be Dinosaur Jr. for sure. I just picture, like the torn jeans, white t-shirt with stain on it, CD club, just guitar distortion, just awesome. I love Dinosaur Jr. But it makes sense that they're not a radio friendly project, but that would be my number 5. CJ up there in the Mount Grungemore, chiseled in his face.
So my number 4, an extremely distant 4th place would be Nirvana. I don't know why. Nirvana's never connected with me in any way. I don't find their music interesting at all. Only one of these bands, by the way, would be in my top 100 of all time. My number 3 would be Alice in Chains. Number 2, I'd go Soundgarden. And my number 1, which I think would probably be in my top 100, would be Pearl Jam. Then if I'm picking a 5th, obviously I'm a huge Dinosaur Jr. fan, so if they're a grunge band, which I'm not so entirely sure that they are, they would be on my list. But definitely a grunge band, and a band I feel more comfortable saying is a grunge band would be Screaming Trees. Love them. That would be probably the pick for me. They would slot in right behind Pearl Jam in the 2 spot.
Wow. I like Screaming Trees a lot, but I don't like them even more than Soundgarden, I would say. But I do like them a lot.
I'm pretty locked in my 4. I don't think, I like Dinosaur Jr., but they're not in my top 100 or anything. And bands like Mudhoney and Screaming Trees just didn't quite have enough memorable stuff. So my grunge 4, and there are only 4 people in Mount Rushmore, so there's no room for anybody else. So nobody else is making it. It's Nirvana, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, and Pearl Jam.
What about we didn't talk about L7 at all, or Hole?
Hole's not a grunge band, please.
By the way, the best, I don't know if this is grunge, but I love, I think the best 90s alternative rock song is Stars by Hum. I love that song so much. It's so cool. But what else have they done?
I have nothing to say to that.
All right, everybody, let us know what you think of the big 4, how you rank them. Who would be your 5th band that you would put in a big 5? And what is grunge after all, anyways? Let us know your thoughts. Be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications. Check the description for links to the social media accounts, and we will see you next week. Thanks for watching.